Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai Chapter 7, Halacha 4, Part 2 of the Shir and the Art Scroll 69a2. This sugya, these sets of sugyas are diamonds in Jewish thinking. These are diamonds if you want to understand subtlety of how the Jewish law works. And we're going to be talking about the concept of Meila, and then it's going to link back to this concept that we're talking about in the Mishnah about the separating of the tithes and the wine. The case in the Mishnah, just to recap, is you have a barrel of wine. It's a large quantity of wine, and you get this from a Kuthian, so it's definite tevel. And this was obtained literally just before the onset of Shabbat. So as Rashi is pointing out in the parallel, in other words, if you're separating things out, you have to put it somewhere, especially if it's wine. So you didn't have the time to do it, and you're making a mental designation, and then you're going to physically take it out after Shabbat. Now, the question is, can you use this wine or not? Can you drink this? And Rabbi Meir, who is going to be the anonymous source in this mission, is saying, yes, you can, because you've made the mental designation beforehand, and all you're going to do is you're going to physically separate it out to finish off the tithing at the end of after Shabbat ends, and then retroactively it'll be like it was already done in the beginning, and therefore you can drink the wine. This is a three-way maloket that came up in part one of this year between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yose, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. All three, by the way, agree that there's going to be Breira. This case is going to be just so beautiful with these coins, and I found it so interesting. So it's going to be covering this concept of Meila, and Meila is going to be where you have a misappropriation or you somehow used property that's hekdesh that you weren't allowed to do. And in Masechet Meila, it's even talking about when they're building the temple, the workers leaning on the stones to get personal benefit to rest. That is going to constitute Meila. And if you're doing it intentionally, and you're intentionally using consecrated property, you get a death from heaven. It's very serious. And if you did it unintentionally, there's a penalty. So if you did get a physical monetary benefit from something, not just like leaning on the stones, but actually, perhaps you consumed some wine that was already consecrated, or coins, you used some coins and spent them. Well, you have to repay the temple. There's a penalty of a fifth, but it actually ends up being 25% penalty, and it's a calculated calculation of within, without, and so when they're saying it's a fifth, it's really 25%, and then you also have to bring the asham of Meila to atone for this. So this ends up getting to be a very expensive proposition to do Meila. And so the case that's going to be coming up, it goes like this. It says that we learned in a Mishnah there, it's going to be in Meila 21b, that if a peruta of hekdesh fell into a purse and it became mixed with someone's personal perutos, or if one said a peruta in this purse shall be hekdesh, but he did not specify which specific peruta, then what happened was he made a mixture of a peruta of hekdesh, and then he has intermixed in it his personal coins. Then as soon as the question, what Rabbi Akiva is saying over there in the Mishnah, is as soon as he spends the first peruta in that purse, he committed Meila, and he's liable to bring an asham. And these are the words of Rabbi Akiva over there in that Mishnah. The sages say that he's not liable until he spends all of the perutos in the purse. So we have something that is definitely going to be consecrated. It definitely has kedusha. And now it becomes intermixed. And you say, wait a second, how does this get back to a barrel of wine? And we're going to get to that. It does loop back. So we're going to get into exactly the idea of Rabbi Akiva, and the Gemara is going to explain this dispute. It was taught in a Breira, assuming there were two perutos in the purse one of hekdesh and one of his own, upon spending the first pruta, he has possibly committed Meila, since it's questionable whether he spent the pruta of hekdesh. So when Rabbi Akiva is talking about it, we're talking about two coins. One is consecrated, one is not. Rabbi Akiva says when you spent the first one, that's going to be suffix Meila, because there's one left. It might be that one. So Gemara says upon spending the second pruta, he has definitely committed Meila, since he definitely spent the pruta of hekdesh. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. So the idea is that, according to Rabbi Akiva, if there are many coins, let's say 10 coins, when he's spending any number of them up to the last one, he's going to be liable for this suffix possible Meila penalty. And once he spent the last one, now definitely he committed Meila. So even when you're doing the suffix one, according to Rabbi Akiva, he's not liable for the definite sin of Meila, but he's liable for suffix. And Rabbi Akiva is consistent with all the other opinions he has, like in Kerisos, where he's going to equate the law of Meila liability with the law of a chatas liability, so that when somebody is in doubt whether he committed the law of a chatas liability, or whether he ate like chalev or something like that, he's going to bring an asham toloi. In other words, he has to bring the asham offering based on a suffix, and that's going to protect him from punishment if it did turn out that he actually did sin. So perhaps there could even be a concept of Breira there, in a way, where the asham is atoning in case you did. Okay, so this Breira is going to basically be explaining that Rabbi Akiva is holding that as soon as he spent even one of these coins in the purse, he's liable to the asham toloi. In other words, he has to bring the offering for doubt. And if he went and he spent the second pruta in the case that he had only two protos in there, then he certainly did the Meila, and in that case, he's going to bring the asham meilos. That's going to be the asham for a definite transgression, and he has to pay the hekdesh. So if he spends the last pruta before he brings this asham toloi, he has to bring it all, since by now he's certain that he committed Meila, and then he also brings only, in the other case, he would bring the, if he didn't finish off the coins, he would bring the asham toloi, and if he finishes it off, he brings the one for a definite asham milos, because he definitely did it, and he also has to pay the penalty. Very serious. And the Gemara is going to continue and say, but the sages say upon spending any of the prutos while leaving some behind, he has not committed Meila and incurs no liability, even for possible Meila, until he spends the last one, and then he has committed Meila. So the Gemara is going to refine and explain the sage's ruling, and it actually makes a lot of sense. Rabbi Yudan, the father of Rabbi Matanya, says that which the sages say, that one is not liable for Meila for any of the first prutos that he spends, are going to be a case where there are 10 prutos in the purse, or any other number greater than 2, basically. But the sugya says that where there were 10 prutos in the purse, but it really means anything greater than 2. And even after the first one gets consecrated, the first coin gets consecrated, the idea is that the majority of these coins greater than 2 in the purse are going to be your property. It's chulin, and it's non-consecrated. So as long as that majority exists, then each pruta taken from the purse is presumed to be chulin. So one who spends it does not commit Meila. And by the way, we saw this in chapter 7, Halacha 3 in Demai, where the same sort of logic is working. You're going to drink this cup of wine that you're given on Shabbat, that you made the Demai designation for before Shabbat, and this is going to be wine of Demai that you're being served on Shabbat, and you're drinking it up until the amount where there's a tiny amount of hulin left and a tiny amount of the tithes that you took out, and then you put down the cup and you're done. And in the cup that on Shabbat would be muksa, because it has something that has tithes, and that you're not allowed to move tithes, that tithe produce on Shabbat. So, especially if you're a non-kohen. So, in the case over there, basically, it's going to be the same idea. It's going to be that the majority of the wine exists in that cup that you're drinking, and that majority is going to be hulin. And then basically you're going to identify it at the last possible moment. It's going to be the same thing here with these coins, that if you had, say, 10 coins in the purse and you took out the first one, the odds are that you took out from the majority the coin that would be hulin, and you could use that. And as long as that majority still exists, each one is taken out is presumed to be hulin. And the idea is that you did not commit Meila. So whenever the pruta gets removed from this majority, we apply this principle that, whatever gets separated is assumed to have been separated from the majority. And this is a concept that comes up in Ketubot 15a in the Bavli. And it allows us to also come over here and assume that the pruta that we're taking out is hulin, and it's not subject to Meila. And again, the same concept is used in Demai Chapter 7, Halacha 3. And we covered that in the Shir. So the Gemara says, but if there were only 2 prutos in the purse, including the hektish one, and by the way, that is going to be Rabbi Akiva's position over there, is that we're talking about a case of 2 coins in the purse. And it says such that there is no majority of hulin, then, it's equal. There's no majority. It's not like 3 coins. And then even the sages will agree that upon spending the first pruta, one has committed possible meila, so they would agree with Rabbi Akiva on it. And upon spending the second one, he has committed definite meila. And so really, this is going to be where they're going to agree that if there are, 2 coins, they're going to agree it's like what Rabbi Akiva says. But the difference here is going to be about what happens if there's, say, 10 coins. And Rabbi Akiva is holding that even in this purse that's holding, say, 10 coins, even spending one of them is possible meila. That is going to be the difference. Now, it's unclear why Rabbi Akiva does not apply this principle that whatever someone separates is assumed to have come from the majority. That is unclear. But that's going to basically be the point over here. And, Rabbi Akiva is basically of the opinion that, liability should be incurred only when there are more than 2 prutos. There are no more than, that liability should be incurred only when there are no more than 2 prutos in the purse. And, this dispute is going to really be on what happens if there's more than 2. And so the sages are agreeing with Rabbi Akiva in the case of 2. How is this going to get back to the wine? So in the Mishnah that we're talking about over there in Meila, Rabbi Akiva is holding that if someone said a pruta in this purse shall be hektish, but he does not specify which of the prutos it is, then as soon as he spends the first pruta from the purse, he committed Meila. The sages are saying that he's not liable until he spends all of the coins in the purse, and it's going to be this next clause that the Mishnah is teaching that in a slightly different case, another law is going to apply. Rabbi Akiva is going to actually concede and say that if someone says a pruta from this purse, he is not, that it shall be hektish, he is not liable for meila until he spends the entire contents of the purse. Now, the Gemara elsewhere is going to say that these sorts of cases where it's going to say a difference of in this or from this are among the most obscure halachot in the oral law. And it's worth looking at some of these differences to sharpen your mind. That's why this is in here. And that's one of these cases here. And so Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish in this Gemara asks before Rabbi Yochanan, what is the difference between one who says a pruta in this purse shall be hektish, and one who says a pruta from this purse shall be hektish. In other words, in the first case, we were saying in this purse, okay? And over here now, there's a slightly different law where it says from this purse. The difference is, what's the difference between in this purse or from this purse? You're saying, okay, a pruta from this purse shall be hektish. And basically, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is asking his teacher, why is it that in the former case, Rabbi Akiva holds that he's liable for Meila as soon as he spends the first pruta, and in the last case, Rabbi Akiva holds that he's liable only when he spends the last one? What's going to be the difference? Now, Rabbi Kanievsky says about this that in the first case, Rabbi Akiva immediately holds him liable for suffix Meila, possible Meila, because it's unknown which of the prutos he consecrated. So basically, what we're trying to figure out now is why does a different law apply in the different case between where you're saying in this purse or from the purse? What is going to be the difference? And both, are going to be having different laws. So the Gemara says before answering the question, the Gemara is going to cite another question that Reish Lakeish poses regarding Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So really there's two questions in here. The first is going to be, and it ties right back into whether you're going to be drinking tevel with this wine on Shabbat. So in the first question, and it's going to answer this first question, what's the difference between in the purse and from the purse? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said further, he said, when one consecrates a pruta within a purse and he never identifies a specific pruta as the consecrated one, then even if he spent all of the prutos in the purse, he should not have committed Meila. And this is going to be analogous to which was said in the Breira about somebody who declares that there's 2 lugans of wine and that you're eventually going to separate it out. And then from the wineskin, and you're gonna separate it out after Shabbat. And this is basically the Mishnah. And over there's a maloket, a three-way maloket between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yose, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon don't allow you to drink any of this wine until the ties are actually separated, because they're worried that perhaps if you drink some of it, the barrel will spill over, or the wineskin will split open, and the remaining wine will spill out, and then ties can't be separated. And so then with the concept of Breira, he basically, with Breira, would have drunk tevel. Why? Because the ties are not there. In other words, if the truma is never actually separated, then the designation that you made on the truma is void. It's not there. The material that you're supposed to do it on is gone. And then retroactively, Breira kicks in according to Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon, and retroactively, because you couldn't separate it, you drank tevel. So by the same token, if the wine does not spill out, but the person drinks all of it without setting aside anything, that's going to be Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's worry, then the initial designation is null and void. And you drunk tevel. Why? Because there's no wine left to consecrate it on. And so in either case, whether it spills out before or you just forgot to separate it out, and Shabbat after Shabbat goes and you just use all the wine and there's nothing left, well, retroactively you drank tevel. Very serious. Rabbi Meir says you can drink this. So what's going on over here? And so we see that, if no specific portion is ever identified as the truma or the meiser, then basically what we see here is that this original designation is void. It's annulled. And it's as if you never actually you never said anything, because no truma or meiser was actually taken out. Now, the Gemara says here in our case too, let us say the similar thing. In other words, the case is like this. If the person spends all of the coins in the purse and he never identifies any of them as the hekdesh, his hekdesh designation should also be annulled. And so basically, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is basically saying, well, wait a second, why isn't this annulled just like what Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai are saying? In other words, you never actually And by the way, very brilliant concept by Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish over here to come along and say, wait a second, over here, if you started the verbal designation and you have this time gap between Shabbat, you physically didn't take it out after Shabbat, and you just forgot to do it, and you drank all of the wine, there was no physical material that was actually taken out to be separated physically as truma or meiser. And so over there, they're saying retroactively it's going to be a null consecration. You didn't actually consecrate anything because nothing was actually physically taken out. Nothing actually got identified. And that's part of the process. So they're both going to say, okay, you drank tevel. And he's saying over here, why doesn't that logic work over here as well? In other words, you designated the coin, but you actually just spent all of the coins. Why is it going to be Breira where, retroactively, hey, they both have Kedusha. The Truma Gedola has Kedusha, and over here the Hektish has Kedusha. So why isn't it a null and void designation? In other words, the Gemara is really asking, says this Gemara, with this result, retroactively, that all the money he spent was actually going to be Hulin, and he never actually committed Meila. So brilliant question. And this is helping us to get more into what's going on with this wine. And the Gemara responds to the other, question. Okay, so it says, Gemara says, the case of wine is different than the case of the coins, because here, in the case of the wine, the designation is contingent upon a future separation of the truma and the meiser, since the person expressly stipulated that he is designating the portions that I will eventually separate. So in that case of the wine, if the separation never actually occurs, then the designation is annulled because the stipulation was never fulfilled. But in the case of the coins, the person is just designating a pruta as the hektish. He never made the designation contingent on a future separation of a specific coin. And then the designation automatically takes effect on one of the pruta coins in the purse. So the idea is that, over here in the wine, it's going to be different. Why? Because over there in the wine, that there's a difference, right? He's saying that I will eventually separate, and he's going to eventually identify and pull it out, okay? And if you didn't do that, it's going to be annulled. The case of the coins is different, okay? As soon as he designates one of the coins, it's hektish, okay? And he did not make that designation contingent on a future separation. Over here, in this other case of the wine, you actually have to pull something out. That thing that you're pulling out, only when you pull it out does it have that kedusha. So, in the beginning of the coins, one of them in there definitely has kedusha. The other case over there, it has to physically be identified, and then once it's pulled out and physically separated and identified, that's when it has kedusha. So over here, if one spent all of the coins in the purse, then, and if he never identified any of them hektish, he committed meila. Why? Because one of them was already getting sanctity as soon as he consecrated it. And over there in the wine, it's only based on what he's eventually going to pull out and physically take out. And once he physically takes it out, that's when the stipulation gets fulfilled. And also when it gets kedusha. So getting back to the first case about Rabbi Akiva and this difference between, in the purse and from the purse. So we were looking at, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and, the case of the wine and the purse, and now we're going to get back into Rabbi Akiva with the difference between what's the difference between saying a pruta from the purse is going to be hektish and a pruta in this purse will be hektish. And Rabbi Yonah says in this Gemara, both here, where one says in this purse, and here, where one says from this purse, the designation is not contingent upon separation. In other words, why you could say, wait a second, why did we cover Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's second question first? And that's really the summation of the answer that's coming here to teach us, in the purse and from the purse, okay? because over here, when you're, in either case, the person did not say that which I will eventually separate, okay? And, if he were saying a pruta from this purse shall be hektish, and there's a specific pruta that gets consecrated, the Gemara says that it is considered as if he said, this purse shall not be spent in the entirety without including a pruta of hektish. So the statement is to be understood that the last pruta to be spent is going to be the designation as hektish. Now, the statement of a pruta from this purse shall be hektish is also going to be understood to mean that the last pruta to be taken from the purse is going to be designated as hektish. So Rabbi Akiva is ruling that in this case, one is not liable for Meila until he spends the entire contents of the purse, and the liability is incurred for spending the very last pruta. But when somebody says a pruta in this purse shall be hektish, he is understood to mean that an unspecified pruta shall be hektish. So in this case, Rabbi Akiva rules that he's liable for a suffix Meila, a Meila like an asham of suffix, of asham taloi, for Meila as soon as he spends even one. In other words, the difference is going to be very much like the wine. Okay, so in the wine, it's going to be where you're taking out a future designation, and in the future designation, it doesn't get kedusha until you physically take it out. The difference that's coming up over here is when you're saying a pruta in this purse shall be hektish, one of them, it's unspecified which one, is in there, it has kedusha. So if you spent even one of them, Rabbi Akiva's point is that now you might have spent the one that is the Meila one, and so it's suffix Meila. And what's the difference? Why is the law a little bit different where he's saying from this purse? Basically, what it's saying is he's saying that the last, when you're making that designation, okay, and you're saying from this purse, it means that you can spend all of the coins up until the last one. The last one is going to be reserved as hektish. And, it's kind of like Demai Chapter 7, Halacha 3, where you have the wine in the cup, and you're drinking the hulin wine on Shabbat, that's going to be Demai, and you're only leaving and identifying the last one, the last part, as the Meiser, the Truma Meiser tithe right at the end. And you put the cup down and you're done. And over here, it's basically going to be like the same case. In other words, you've identified basically where you're saying from this purse, you're basically saying that you can use all of the coins in the purse, just like you're drinking almost all of the wine in the cup in Chapter 7, Halacha 3. And that very last bit, you're going to be doing that identification of this portion now is going to be the one that has sanctity. And over here, the last part of the coin, the last coin, is going to be the one that has sanctity. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is going to be holding that even if one does not say that I will eventually separate, okay, his designation is going to be based upon a future separation of the item. The Gemara is going to point out something that seems to be a little inconsistent. In other words, he's holding, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is asking and saying that, look, it's very similar to where you're saying a pruta in this purse shall be hektish, to where you're having 2 lagan of wine that I will eventually separate and designate as truma. And basically, he's saying that, look, if you finished all of the wine and you didn't actually take out that 2% as truma gadola, it's a null. It's null. It's void. And over here with the coins, if you didn't physically take out the hektish coins and you just spent all of them, it should be like the wine. In other words, it should be a null designation. So the Gemara says that the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish in this matter is going to be reversed elsewhere, and it says in the Masechet in Meila, this is going to be in Bavli, Meila 13b, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says regarding water designated for pouring on the altar as a libation, this is going to be on each day of the holiday of Sukkah, there's a water libation, and it comes with the morning tamid. It comes also with the wine libation, by the way. So what happens now when you're designating the water? And if more than the required 3 lugin of water is placed on the sacred vessel, one commits Meila for deriving a pruta's worth of benefit from the portion that stood to be used as a libation. And according to the calculation of what percentage those 3 lugin should comprise within a mixture. In other words, the sins of Meila consist of deriving at least a pruta's worth of benefit from hektish. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is holding that when someone places more than the necessary amount of water in the kli, basically, really, if it's going to be 3 lugin, you have to really put in 3 lugin. And that 3 lugin is going to be what's consecrated. What happens if you're putting in more? So the 3 lugin that's put within the vessel, that's going to be hektish. And the remaining water is going to be chulin. And in order to be liable for meila, someone has to derive at least a pruta's worth of benefit from the consecrated water, since it's impossible to determine which of this 3 lugin is what is going to be consecrated. And then you have this chulin mixture inside of it. One is going to be liable only if he derives benefit in an amount sufficient to ensure that he actually derived a pruta's worth of benefit. So the example would go like this, says the Vilna Gaon. For example, if a vessel contains 6 lugin of water, then half of it is consecrated, and one incurs meila if he drinks 2 pruta's worth of water from the vessel. And then it's assumed that he derived a pruta's worth of benefit from the hektish portion. So you're consecrating this jug of water, and you're going to pour it out for the sukkah water libation. And now, what are you doing? You're drinking some of the water, but you put in more water than the 3 lugin. You say, okay, I have extra water here. What did you do? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says you committed meila. Why? Because it's mixed in. So the Gemara says, yet here in our sugya, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says like this. In other words, over there, he's saying that if you have this mixture and you're deriving benefit from it, then basically, what did you do? You drank the water, you got benefit, and you committed meila. Now over here, he's going to say like this. He's arguing that when one consecrates a pruta within the purse, he never identifies the specific pruta, and then he spends all of it, he never constituted meila. And according to that argument, he's basically trying to pull it back to what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Yose are arguing here, that it's a null consecration because you didn't physically take out the portion you were supposed to do. According to this argument, if it should be over there like the 3 lugin of water that are placed in the vessel, and then you're drinking extra water in there. And basically, when the 3 lugin that will actually be used are not identified, who's going to benefit from the water, and did he commit meila or not? So the Gemara answers. It says, after Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish asked the question about the coins and he heard the response, he himself reversed and retracted and conceded that his question was resolved. In other words, he accepted the explanation above. In other words, what we're seeing here is we're seeing in this Gemara over here and the Gemara over there in Meila, a change in time over the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. And so basically, we're seeing an evolution in the understanding of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish of the law. And, through this process, he's asking about these subtleties to his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, about how to understand it. So he accepts this explanation, and basically the idea of designating something that I will eventually separate, and this designation is going to be contingent upon his actually separating the item. But when he does not make this stipulation, his designation is effective even if the item is never actually physically identified. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish made the statement in Masechet Meila when the libation water is mixed in with unconsecrated water, and somebody who's deriving a pruta's worth of benefit from the libation portion of the mixture, he committed meila. So how are we going to get back to over here on Shabbat and this designation? And we're going to be finishing up, and we're getting back to this case about the separation of Trumas and Meiser on Shabbat. Now, the Gemara that's coming up is going to be talking about the possibility of making a Truma and Meiser designation before Shabbat with a stipulation that's taking effect on Shabbat. And then, or he's making a designation on Shabbat with a stipulation that will be taken after Shabbat. So this Mishnah starts off, he's saying, what happens if you're doing this before Shabbat and then you're physically taking it out after Shabbat? This case is going to be a little different. Either he's making the designation on Shabbat with a stipulation he's going to take it out after, or he's doing it where the stipulation should take effect. He's doing it before Shabbat with the stipulation taking effect on Shabbat. So a little bit different than this Mishnah. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Elazar says, a person may stand on the eve of the Shabbos and say, this produce is hereby designated as Truma, effective tomorrow on Shabbat. And although the Truma becomes consecrated on Shabbat, since the designation is made before Shabbat, it is permitted. And that's going to basically be the idea of the rest of it. So there's going to be Maloket, but this is basically what it is. In other words, you're saying here, this produce is hereby designated as Truma, effective tomorrow, and then basically it becomes consecrated on Shabbat. So Gemara says, but a person may not stand on the Shabbos and say, this produce is hereby designated as Truma, effective tomorrow, and, after the Shabbat. In other words, in this case, although the Truma does not become consecrated until after Shabbat, since the designation is made on Shabbat, that's not allowed. So Rabbi Yitzchak is holding that when the rabbis prohibited on the Shabbos an act of tithing, it's not going to be the effect of rectifying the produce. And that's going to make it permitted to make this designation before Shabbat, even if one stipulates that it takes effect on Shabbat. But it's going to be not allowed if somebody's making this designation on Shabbat. That's going to be the what we're going to see is going to be the Halacha. Now, there's a dissenting opinion. This is not going to be the Halacha. Rabbi Yose, son of Rabbi Bun, says a person may not stand on the eve of Shabbat and say this produce is hereby designated as Truma, effective tomorrow on Shabbat, since the Truma becomes consecrated on Shabbos and is it's prohibited to make a designation even before the Shabbos. In other words, it says the Pnei Moshe, here's how Rabbi Yose is arguing. Rabbi Yose, son of Rabbi Bun, this is the Amarah, not the Tana that we've been talking about, that the rabbis disallowed even the effect of making a produce that's going to get rectified on Shabbos, and thus by setting in motion a Truma designation that will affect, actually hold and take effect on Shabbat, one is going to violate this rabbinic injunction against rectifying tevel on Shabbat. So that's going to be the idea. Gemara challenges Rabbi Yose's opinion, and the following Mishnah, this is going to be in Tovel Yom 4.4, contradicts the view of Rabbi Yose, son of Rabbi Bun. It says, regarding a pitcher of water that has the status of a Tovel Yom, and one, by the way, Tovel Yom is literally a tameh pitcher that had been immersed in a mikveh in the daytime, and the nighttime didn't come yet. And the idea is that when you have a utensil or a person, it could be a person too, that gets put into the mikveh, then even after the immersion, the person or the utensil has a vestige of the previous tuma, and that goes away completely until nightfall. And until then, though, it can still contaminate truma meiser through contact, but it does not contaminate meiser, tevel, or hulin. That's going to be the summation. So over here, we're going to learn from the Tovel Yom how this works here for Shabbat as well. It says, and one filled it with produce from a barrel of meiser that is tevel, and he filled the pitcher with meiser rishon that has not yet had his truma meiser separated from it. The rule is as follows. It says, if he said, this produce in the pitcher shall be truma meiser after dark, then the produce is in fact truma meiser after dark, and it's going to be tahor. But if it was Friday, and he said, this produce is hereby designated as my erev, in other words, he's basically making an erev tehumen over here, And then he's saying, with regards to the Erev, says this Gemara, he has not said anything. In other words, it's not a valid Erev. Why? Because the produce was still tevel at twilight. And in any event, the Mishnah is dealing with a Friday and teaching that one can designate the produce as Truma Meiser after dark when it's already Shabbat. This would seem to contradict the view of Rabbi Yose, who's saying that one may not designate tithes on the eve of Shabbos to take effect on Shabbat. Gemara is going to answer this. Rabbi Yose interprets the Mishnah as validating such a designation only after the fact, basically like Breira, right? And that is that the Mishnah means that if one said that the produce shall be Truma Meiser after dark, it's going to be valid. And one is not allowed to do so initially due to the prohibition against rectifying tevel on Shabbat. In other words, Rabbi Yose is coming along and saying, look, you can't make a designation before Shabbat that takes effect on Shabbat. You can't do that. But the Gemara rejects that. And Rabbi Chia taught in the Breira saying that the Mishnah's ruling, this Mishnah over there that we're talking about, which is talking about the Tovel Yom, which is saying that if somebody's pitcher has the status of a Tovel Yom, and he wishes to designate its contents as Truma Meiser, he should say, this produce shall be Truma Meiser after dark. Gemara says, can you possibly say that this means merely that such a designation is valid after the fact? Certainly not. And this definitely overturns Rabbi Yose the Amara's view. In other words, we see from this Breira that when the Mishnah says, if he said, it does not mean that the designation is effective only after the fact. Rather, it uses the wording to basically be saying that, the rabbis, basically what this is showing is the rabbis prohibited the act of doing it on Shabbat, not the effect of making it rectified on Shabbat. Okay, that's going to be the subtlety here. In other words, you can't make this designation while you're standing on Shabbat for it to take effect after. Okay, everybody agrees with that. The question over here is, what happens if you're standing just before Shabbat? You make the designation for it to take effect on Shabbat. And what Rabbi Chia is pointing out is that you can do it. And so the Gemara concludes and it says, indeed, Rabbi Yose the Amara retracted his ruling. And he conceded that one is permitted to stand on the eve of Shabbat and say, this produce is hereby designated as Truma, effective tomorrow on the Shabbos. And so we see here that, the rabbis, only prohibited the act of doing the tithing on Shabbat, not the act of making produce rectified on Shabbat. So there's a few points that we covered here and, got a lot of, really deep insights onto how the law works. So we see a difference between this barrel of wine and the coins. One of the things about the coins is that in some cases, like if you're saying the pruta in this coin purse, you're designating one right now as having kedusha and as belonging to the temple. And so Rabbi Akiva's point in that case makes a lot of sense, where you're saying, okay, if you spent the first one, then you committed possibly Meila. By the way, it's going to go by the sages. It's not going to be how it is Halacha Maisa. But you can see the idea that over here, in the wine, something has to physically be taken out for it to get the kedusha. And over here, in the case of the coins, something is going to get designation immediately, unless he said from the purse. In the case where he said from the purse, then it's going to be where it's basically going to be where you can spend all of the coins except for the last one. And that last one very much looks like the cup of wine with the separation identification in chapter 7, Halacha 3, where you're drinking this cup of wine. You're drinking the hulin portion, you're leaving over the separated portion. We also see that there's a difference between what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is saying about the separation of the coins and Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's position. It's a little bit different because over there, in the case of taking out the wine, you're going to be taking it out physically at the end of Shabbat. And over here, when you're making the designation for the coins, it's designated right away. And that's why it's not going to be like Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. And over here, with this last case that comes up in the sugya with Rabbi Yose the Amorah, in the first case of the Mishnah, it's talking about you're standing before Shabbat and you're doing the physical separation after Shabbat. Can you drink the wine on Shabbat? Over here, you're coming along and you're making the designation before Shabbat, and then the sanctification takes effect on Shabbat. So you can do that, and that's going to be allowed. And over here, they're all going to agree, by the way, that you can't make this designation on Shabbat for it to take effect after Shabbat. That's disallowed. Have a great day.